Warren, do you think, and you touched on this in your book, that society has become more and more and more feminized, when you especially when you compare it to 50, 60 years ago?
Definitely. And I have no problem with society opening up the option of more feminine behavior on the part of men, as well as having opened up the option of more masculine behavior on the part of women. But we're not just doing that. We're making the feminine behavior as the superior behavior and the masculine behavior as the toxic masculinity. And there is a lot of toxicity in both sexes that took their femininity or masculinity to the extreme. Both sexes became toxic in the process. And so women who were not ever comfortable taking a sexual initiative directly had to learn to take sexual initiatives indirectly. If they didn't learn to take sexual initiatives directly, which is a type of manipulation, then they didn't get a man that they wanted. They didn't get a man that they wanted. They were often very unhappy. And so women developed a lot of toxic behavior if they weren't able to express a more masculine side of taking the risk of asking a man out, taking the risk of sexual rejection, taking the risks of starting a business that might fail. And so it was very helpful for women to learn male skills, but either gender's skills taken to their extreme became toxic. On the male side of the coin, men, in order to be loved, had to be willing to risk their lives, like dying in war, risk their lives in a different way by, working either, if they're a working class male, in the hazardous jobs, as I'm sure is true in Europe. There's about 93% of the people who die in hazardous jobs are males. And those are the ones that just die in hazardous jobs, ones that die in jobs that have what is called remnant deaths, like black lung disease from working in coal mines, where you don't, or as a firefighter, you don't die right away on the job. You die much earlier after you leave your job because of the black lung disease, et cetera. Those are almost all men. So if you're in a boot camp and you learn that your job is to be willing to die for your country, and the sergeant or the person above you, the officer in the boot camp, says, makes some anti-Semitic comments or some anti-female or anti-male comments, and you're let's say short, and he makes a comment about being a little pygmy or a midget, and you say that's really racist, or that's sexist, or or that's anti-Semitic. The job of that officer in the army is to tell you, oh, you sweet little boy, you're going to make a really wonderful soldier worrying about what's anti-Semitic. Your job is to die, to be part of the war machine. Your job is to be a cog in the war machine. The war machine does not work well with squeaky wheels like you. Get down and do 5 push-ups. Get down and do 20 push-ups. If that doesn't work, get down and do 40 push-ups. Guys, you have permission to mock this guy until he gets straightens up and he stops being concerned about who he is and what his sensitivity is, and focuses on recognizing that he's here to be willing to die so this country can survive and to live. And so, and now, does that develop toxicities? It certainly does. It means men learned to not be even in touch with their feelings. It wasn't that we just learned to not express our feelings. We learned that men are very bottom line people, and we learned that if expressing our feelings doesn't get us anywhere, it really doesn't help to be in touch with feelings we can't express. So we might as well repress even getting in touch with those feelings. And that's toxic. When you can't get in touch with your feelings, it comes out in different ways. You act out, you hurt people, you become hurt inside of yourself. And hurt people. And this is and so you see almost all your mass shooters are very hurt people, usually not just dad deprived, but usually deeply hurting inside, and they act it out. And so both sexes have toxicities, but we have framed the world in the last 50 years as there's toxic masculinity and there's sort of, if you will, superior femininity. And that's just a miscalculation of the understanding of both sexes.
And Warren, another thing that I found really interesting was the point that you made in the book where you were talking about the men who felt unheard. These were liable to be your Brexit voters, your Trump voters, because the only way that they had of actually making themselves heard was at the ballot box.
Yes. Yes. And Trump was sort of like, he was articulating without worry about what he said, and just sort of like, I'm going to lambast, it's going to land where it does. I'm going to tell the truth from the way that a lot of people in the United States who felt left out, who felt unheard, especially the more developed the woke culture became, the more canceling the cancel culture became, the more junior high school teachers were saying the future is female, and boys were feeling that, I'm a male and I'm hearing that the future is female. That doesn't inspire me very much to do really well in school and to really, watch out for my future, because if I succeed, I'll be told it's because I have male privilege. If I fail, I'll be ignored. And so a lot of people felt caught between a rock and a hard place. And it appeared to them like Trump, for all the bully that he was just cutting right through that, rather than sort of what they would think of as namby-pambying around, saying everything with precise sensitivity and precision that so many politicians did on the part of both the left and the right. And so, yes, there's so much that the political left was not hearing about what the average experience was of the average person. The average family felt that they saw the father going out early in the morning, becoming that firefighter, becoming the logger, doing the hazardous job, becoming working, making more money at a career, but also sacrificing being away from the children, experiencing what I call the father's catch-22. The dad learning to love his family by being away from the love of his family. Most women got this. Most families got this, but they didn't feel that the political left got this. And so when Trump was willing to speak about these things without any fear of stepping on toes, it felt like finally they had a champion.
That's very interesting. And you alluded earlier when you were talking to the kind of angry, bitter young men who often find themselves in positions where they're so angry that they start acting out. And obviously the extreme end of that is the mass shooters that you talk about. But there's a bigger, seemingly a bigger culture, or a bigger movement, or a bigger group of people who've been enabled by social media and technology to congregate, to share thoughts, to kind of talk to each other, whether it's incels or whatever that is. What should society's attitude be to those people? Because I have to say, as a man who's always tried to embody the traditional qualities of masculinity, which is you strive, you work hard, you have ambition, you have drive, etc., I do struggle to have empathy. I mean, just in general, because I'm Russian, but in particular to that group of people, because there is a kind of what now is fashionably termed victim blaming in my psyche, which is like, well, why don't you get up off the couch and go and try and do something? And of course, I recognize that factually, based on what you've said, it's a lot more difficult for them than it maybe was for me when I was growing up.
Well, it's a very good question. So let's look at the words like incel. Incel, for the novice tuning in here, means involuntarily celibate. Involuntarily celibate. So these people, these men, are saying that I don't want to be celibate. I'd like to be sexual with a woman, but I'm involuntary. But I have to prevent myself from doing it because, for example, if I put my penis in a woman's body, I'm putting my life in her hands. She can choose to have an abortion, or she can choose to sue me for support. If she decides to not abort and to have the child, I'm sued for support. From that one sexual experience, I put my life in her hands. There's if I want to have equal access to that child, because even though I didn't intend to have the child, I nevertheless feel like I want to help raise that child, because I know children do best when raised by both parents, and I feel it's only fair for me to be equally involved. And I'm being told that I don't have an option to be equally involved in that child's life. I only have an option to pay for that child's support. And I see that in court after court, I don't have more than a little chance of winning. And if I had a chance of winning, I'd at least have to spend the equivalent of $150,000 US to hire lawyers, hire expert witnesses, hire people to convince the judge to allow me to be a good father. That feels too much of a risk for sex. So you and I are programmed, Konstantin, to work our rears off and to do what we need to do. You wouldn't be doing this podcast if you weren't that type of male. I wouldn't be writing books if I wasn't that type of male. But not every male is like that. Some men do not have, they may have been brought up without a dad themselves. They may not be as motivated. But they still are heterosexual. They still care for women, but it's too complex. It's too dangerous to be involved. It's like somebody desiring enormously to ride a motorcycle and take risks riding that motorcycle, but then reading and understanding that it's 36 times more likely that you're going to get into an accident per mile of motorcycle riding. So you give up what you want to do because it's too dangerous to do it. That's incels. And basically that's the same psychology behind men going their own way. However, there's two types of things that can come out of that. When men going their own way, or incels meeting together and get together and sharing feelings and sharing their pains and sharing their anger and sharing sometimes hatred of women, because they're so that either can be very healing, because for moments when we're angry and we feel vulnerable, anger is vulnerability's mask. And in any therapy group, every therapist knows that sometimes the anger of a woman or the anger of a man will be exaggerated. I hate my husband. I wish he was dead. I wish I had never met him. I wish I'd never married him. Well, that is anger, of course. That is a hatred of the moment, of course. But almost always, I learn this again and again from doing my couples communication workshops, anger is vulnerability's mask. If you ask, what's the vulnerability behind this anger? You have a totally different feeling about what's happening. Usually what happens is the anger is a stage, and having a chance to vent feelings is therapeutic, as it is in a therapist's office. And this is a very healing, men like this getting together and venting can be very healing. And occasionally it can be very destructive if they don't get off the venting and move into a more constructive life. Now, for me, a constructive life is not withdrawing from women or withdrawing from society. For me, a constructive life is learning how to listen, learning how to interact, learning how to work things through. And I can write about what I feel and talk about what I feel, and I'm able to make a living doing that. But let's open our hearts to the people who can't make a living doing that. They're not saying, I want to destroy women. I want to hurt women. I don't want good things for women. They're just saying it's too complex for me to be out there with women. I need to withdraw and be by myself.